shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio. Abraham Hamilton III here, your host of the Hamilton Corner program. What we're going to do now is catch up on some of the foolishness, not necessarily du jour, but de week. That's not a technical French phrase, by the way. Some things that I've been having in my show prep stack that I hadn't been able to get to, but I think it's important for you to be aware of, just to show you some of the things that are happening in this country. So we'll go first. Well, I guess we'll do a whirlwind tour around the country today. We'll start in Colorado, where a lot of people like to see things up high for some reason. I don't know. Maybe you guys can fill me in on that. But the state of Colorado, where the 10th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals heard a case concerning the Electoral College. Yes, the lawsuit was brought by a man by the name of Michael Baca. Michael Baca was an elector in 2016. So if you're not aware, in terms of federal elections, the U.S. populace does not directly elect the U.S. president, but the U.S. populace casts their votes for the president. The results of those votes will then, the results of the votes we cast in general elections for the presidency result in electors being selected in the state, and those electors cast the state's electoral votes. You might have heard of the Electoral College, because what we live in is not a direct democracy. The Founding Fathers, having the opportunity to create an absolute democracy, expressly rejected that. That's why you will never hear me refer to the United States of America as a democracy. You hear a lot of regressives in the news media. You hear a lot among the punditry class consistently referring to America as a democracy. Let me tell you, they're doing that intentionally. The reason why they're doing that is because they want to conceal the fact that the Founding Fathers expressly rejected absolute democracy. The Founding Fathers concluded, after studying all manners of different governments around the world, that an absolute democracy is nothing more than a mobocracy. They did not want to exchange the tyranny of a monarch in King George, exchange that for the tyranny of the mob. A majority is a mob. In fact, they expressly rejected an absolute democracy in favor for what we have, a constitutional republic. When we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, we say we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic, not the democracy, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So that would immediately bring to the fore, well, what's the difference between a democracy and a republic? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because a democracy is one where the will of the majority rules, but a republic, a representative republic, is one that begins with a static basis for the rule of law. The Founding Fathers expressly considered, when we recognize Jeremiah 17, verse 9, that the heart is desperately wicked, who can know it? What will we do if the will of the people one day turns to where the majority, 51% of the populace, says murder should no longer be illegal? We clearly recognize that's wrong, but how can we have a government system based on the will of a people who've gone mad? And they recognize, this is what we need to do. There must be an objective, consistent source for the rule of law in the country, which in our country is the U.S. Constitution. Because the Founding Fathers saw the Constitution as a protectionist measure against the wicked propensity of mankind to pursue evil. So, to answer the question, what would we do as a constitutional republic when the mass of the people would want to, for example, say, okay, now murder should be legalized? Well, at that point, the will of the people would then be put up against an objective standard for the rule of law, which is immutable unless it has an overwhelming support of not just a majority, but a supermajority of the people to reverse their standards. That's how we amend our Constitution, to say, wait a minute, murder cannot be legalized because our Constitution does not allow that. That is why you have regressives who attempt to conceal the fact that we're a constitutional republic, because by referring to us as a democracy, it allows them to pull a sleight of hand when they're then in the front end, they're saying, oh, democracy, democracy, democracy. And in the back end, they say, oh, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. It needs to be changed frequently and imperceptibly. And however we want to just willy-nilly change it, it should be changed. Because if the whole of America knew that we were a constitutional republic, they would not allow frequent and emotional and rabid changes to the Constitution, you see. But we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And one of the features of the constitutional republic is that the Electoral College, with the electoral vote, is how the president is elected. All right, now having said that, in the state of Colorado, Michael Baca was an elector. And the electors are determined on the state level. And the electors, generally speaking, in almost all of the states, the overwhelming majority of the states, the electors are required to cast their electoral votes along with the expressed will of the people in that state. Most of the states, the electors cast their electoral votes along the popular vote in that state. Most of the states, not all of the states, okay? Now, some may ask, well, then how do you change the way that electoral votes are utilized? Well, very simply. Each state has the lawful authority to determine how the electors respond to the constituencies in their state's votes. For example, there are two states, Nebraska and Maine, do not allocate electoral votes based on the statewide popular vote, but they apportion their electoral votes based on divisions of districts in the states, and as well in one state in particular, then the residue of votes that are available. Each state has the lawful authority to change how their electoral votes are allocated. And the number of electoral votes that each state has is determined first and foremost by the population of that state. And the population of that state determines how many Congress members are in that state. The number of senators per state never changes. There are 2 senators per state. But the number of House of Representatives members change based on the population of the state. That is why the census is so important. That is why you have many regressives saying that we need to make sure illegal aliens participate in the census. Why does that happen? Because you can tilt the balance of power in Congress as well as the balance of power in the Electoral College based on population. You see how all of this works together? So when you have, no borders, how do they say it? How no borders, no wall, something, no immigrants at all, no nations at all, because you have regressives in the country that want an influx, a consistent flux of illegal immigrants, because it will tilt the balance of power in the Electoral College in their direction. In addition to tilting the balance of power in Congress in their direction by having a continuous increase in numbers of Congress members. I'll never forget, this is something I experienced following Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana. Louisiana lost representation, the numbers of House of Representatives members in Congress. Texas gained. There was a population shift that ended up being a surge in population in Texas and a reduction in population in Louisiana. And so Louisiana lost Congress members in the House of Representatives, and Texas gained. That was one of the things that I experienced. So getting back to this case, man, I'm doing all of this background. Well, Michael Baca in 2016 was one of the so-called Hamilton electors. And so these are a group of people. There's one of the many attempts to prevent President Trump from taking the White House, from becoming the president, after he won the election fair and square in the Electoral College in 2016, based on the votes, the 2016 votes. So in November 2016, we all Americans voted, but the Electoral College didn't meet to vote until December of 2016. So almost everybody knew what the Electoral College vote was going to turn out as a result of the 2016 race. That's why you had news coverage saying all of that. President Trump won, blah, 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 blah. Well, you had a contingent of electors who have been selected all across the state who said, no, we don't believe Trump should be president. So we are not going to cast our votes in the Electoral College election according to our state law. We are going to substitute our own prerogatives in place of the state law. Well, in the state of Colorado, Michael Baca did that very thing. Instead of, because Hillary Clinton won the state of Colorado, instead of voting for Hillary Clinton, Michael Baca scratched her name out on the Electoral College vote in Colorado and wrote in John Kasich from Ohio. When he did that, the Secretary of State at the time, Wayne Williams in Colorado, who is responsible for overseeing the electoral process in the state, dismissed Michael Baca from his position as an elector and replaced him with a person who would carry out the will of the Colorado people in accordance with the state of Colorado law and cast his electoral vote for Hillary Clinton. Well, Michael Baca sued the Colorado Secretary of State, saying that you have trampled my rights to vote my conscience. And the Secretary of State was like, what? What do you mean your rights? The law outlines the way you're supposed to do this. And so the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, this is amazing, folks. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Colorado ruled that the Secretary of State acted unlawfully by following the Colorado state law. Yes. Yes. Now, I've talked at length about this movement, this national popular vote movement to tilt the vote process in America away from the Electoral College process and toward a national popular vote. And the fact that a tribunal of judges in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals is willing to completely abandon, precedent for the U.S. presidency since the Constitution was ratified in the 1780s, and say all of a sudden now states don't have the authority to determine how their electoral votes are allocated. That's ridiculous. And this is just another assault on the Constitution, and another example as to how Trump derangement syndrome isn't limited to any particular strata in our society. You know, you have some who have, constitutional symptoms of constitutional aversion who actually have taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. This is remarkable, folks. This is remarkable. This is an absolutely ridiculous decision, a ridiculous opinion reached by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and I expect it to be completely smacked down by the United States Supreme Court in short order, because a similar issue has arisen in Washington State, where the Washington State Supreme Court is saying, man, listen, the people have the lawful authority to determine how their electoral votes will be apportioned through their duly elected representation. That is how the U.S. government works. We are a constitutional republic we are a constitutional representative republic. But the 10th Circuit, this tribunal in the 10th Circuit, found it for some reason okay to say, Constitution, Smarstitution. Who cares about the Electoral College? Who cares about Colorado state law? We are going to completely throw all of that away because we don't feel like Donald Trump should have been the president. Anyway, I thought that was important to present to you because I just want to show you that even though you don't hear about it every day, there are consistent efforts to completely undermine the rule of law in our country and to take the United States Constitution, which has been the source of law for the longest existing constitutional republic in the history of the world. Though America is a baby in terms of the age of our nation, we are nevertheless the longest existing constitutional republic under one form of government in the history of the world. That's why I get so irritated with people who are extremely ignorant to America's history, two, who are ignorant to governmental history around the world, that are so willing and so quick to say, we need to get rid of the way we do things in America. America is horrible. That's how they sound in my ear, by the way. America is horrible. They learned it from their regressive professors in college, many of them. America is horrible. We just need to scrap the entire thing and start from scratch. America is the worst nation that you ever had in the world. It's just a prevalence of evil. It's evil. It's evil. And I'm saying, wow. America is a nation that has its imperfections, that we have had grotesque injustices in our nation's history. No doubt about it. But can you point to a nation that hasn't had grotesque injustices? And then the question I always follow up with, can you point to a nation that has responded to those grotesque injustices the way that America has? No. So I have no problem with people who would offer a legitimate critique of things that have transpired historically in America and a fact-based legitimate critique of what's happening today. But you will not be able to successfully persuade me that America needs to be discarded to the dustbins of history. We have been a beacon of freedom and justice around the world. And we have taken gargantuan strides to do what the founders articulated in the preamble, is to form a more perfect union. This experiment that is America, by God's grace, will continue until he says it's over. In spite of the efforts of those who I would say very simply are enemies of America. You know, there's some in our country, they are so committed to destroying our country that they refuse to acknowledge the beauty of our nation. And I think a lot of that is resulting in this great divide. I don't think the divide in our country is as much between American citizen and American citizen as it is between the so-called wannabe elite in our country and the regular American citizen. I think even with the intense political rancor and discussion that happens when you actually sit across from a person, you know, you break bread with them, have a meal, you'll find that, man, we have so many things that we have in common as a nation, and that we can build on as human beings, instead of allowing these social engineers who think they know better than you, who want to have all of our society relegated to a few elite who pull the puppet strings of our society, who are more than willing to take your money and to take your guns so that they can be the ones with all the guns and all the money and then tell you how much you should be able to eat. I don't fancy that at all. And I think it's high time, and this is why I'm a great proponent of real deal fellowship, for us to shut our ears to these social engineers and break bread with one another as fellow American citizens.
The Hamilton Quarter podcast and one-minute commentaries are available at afr.net. Back to the Hamilton Quarter on American Family Radio.
The United States Supreme Court building is one of the most imposing, a worthy meeting place for the highest tribunal of the land.
That tribunal began meeting to decide America's most important issues back in 1790, when 6, not 9 justices met. Fast forward to the 2020 race for the White House, and now there are calls for as many as 15. The Constitution doesn't mandate a number of Supreme Court justices. 9 have sat on the bench since 1869. The last time the court got even close to making a significant change, 82 years ago.
I will appoint justices who will not undertake to override the judgment of the Congress.
President Franklin Roosevelt was so upset the right-leaning Supreme Court in 1937 would not go forward with his New Deal plan that he tried to add more justices. Supreme Court packing was born. In order to change the number of justices on the Supreme Court, both the House and Senate would need to send a bill to President Trump for his signature. No indication that would happen on his watch.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio. Now, I played that to give a little bit of the backdrop and the background and history for the court packing idea, which, as the audio clip just said, FDR was one who it was his brainchild. When he formulated his New Deal legislation that was struck down originally by the court. He was so mad, he proposed to amend the Constitution to add 6 more justices to the Supreme Court so that he could have a court that did his bidding, basically. He wanted these policies passed. They were unconstitutional, and the court said so originally in 1937. But following that threat, and this is between the lines what people don't really face. Following that threat, FDR basically broke up the New Deal, because the New Deal originally was basically packaged as one huge piece of legislation. Well, the Supreme Court rejected that. He comes out with his court packing scheme, and he threatened the Supreme Court justices. And so then he broke up the New Deal into individual legislative proposals, and one by one, the Supreme Court affirmed them. So he basically intimidated the Supreme Court into obeisance by threatening to pack it, to nullify their influence. Because were he able to add 6 new justices to the court, he already knew that he had several who already favored his New Deal policies, even though the majority of the 9 that were on the court at the time rejected them. But if he were able to get, 1 or 2 to go along with his new 6, if he can get 2 to go along with his newly appointed 6, if they were to expand to 15, then whatever he wanted to do would be able to be passed. So that is what happened historically. Fast forward to where we are now. Haven't you heard usually the people who complained about judicial activism and the overreach of the court and the court serving, and I've said as lawyers in black dresses serving as an oligarchical source of tyranny, right? Well, lately, you're starting to hear that come from regressives. You see, for so long, regressivism has not been able to win at the ballot box. It's not been able to win at the ballot box. So the main tour de force that regressivism has utilized to advance its agenda has been through the court system. But just as I've discussed numerous times in this program, with the election of President Trump, his most enduring legacy will be the legacy of the judiciary. He's appointing hundreds of federal judges who have a constitutional orientation, who are strict constructionists, constitutionalists, jurists, and he is slowly but surely changing the dynamics of the courts, starting at the federal district court level, going all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so that was why, Kavanaugh was so vehemently opposed. And I've said before, I've had my reservations with Kavanaugh. I think, as far as I'm concerned, the jury is still out on what type of justice Kavanaugh will be on the high court. But many of the regressives were scared to death of him being on the court. They thought, oh, no, they're going to have a conservative majority on the court for decades to come. And so that brings me to this particular story as I do my, around the world survey of legal cases from this week, where several Democrat senators, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, Richard Blumenthal, that beacon of integrity, from Connecticut, Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii, Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York filed an amicus brief concerning a gun rights case from the city of New York. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about the case, but the facts of the case are not what's important here. The basics of the case is that the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association has sued the city of New York. The basis for the lawsuit is that it dealt with legal limitations on where gun owners could transport their licensed, locked, and unloaded firearms. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association filed their lawsuit, and the Democrat senators filed a brief urging the Supreme Court to stay out of the case, because the NRA supports the lawsuit, and they are trying to prevent the court from striking a win for the Second Amendment. And for those who are believers in the Second Amendment, so these senators, this is audacious, folks. These senators, Senator Whitehouse, Blumenthal, Hirono, Durbin, and Gillibrand, signed on to a brief to the Supreme Court where they're trying to tell the court, please don't take this case. Don't take this case. But they threatened the Supreme Court justices in their brief. I'm going to read to you a sentence from the brief where these Democrat senators are threatening the Supreme Court. They said, quote, "The Supreme Court is not well, and the people know it. Perhaps the court can heal itself before the public demands it be restructured in order to reduce the influence of politics," end quote. Oh, word? That's what they're going to do? They said, I'm going to translate this because, they speak in highfalutin terms, but y'all know I boil it down to the lowest common denominator. They said, look, Supreme Court, y'all better stay out of this case or else we might just have to revisit that repacking deal. Or else you may face restructuring. Now, if you listen to this program, you've heard me say that Congress should restructure courts like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, Ninth Circus, which is starting to change thanks to President Trump and his nominees. You've heard me say some of these judges need to be notified that they are still required to follow the Constitution. But isn't it amazing that you're starting to see now, and I predicted this, you're starting to see now for the first time, and I would say the last 20 years, where Democrats are getting concerned about the construct or the composition of the federal courts. That's amazing. So you expect to persuade these justices to embrace your legal reasoning by a threat? From the tolerance crowd? From the everybody's entitled to their truth? I told you, folks, these folks don't tolerate other people's ideas if they don't agree with them. For them, tolerance is a one-way street with the person on that one-way street held at gunpoint. You are tolerant or else. I'm going to read it again. The Supreme Court is not well. You're telling the justices that they're sick. The Supreme Court is not well, and the people know it. Perhaps the court can heal itself before the public demands it be restructured in order to reduce the influence of politics. It's funny, but I didn't see any briefs like this from Democratic senators on Obergefell. I didn't see any briefs like this from Democrat senators in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. I didn't see any of that. In Bowers versus Hardwick. I didn't see any of that. But now that you feel like you're losing your grip on the Supreme Court, now you're like, heal yourself or else. And think about that. If an entity is sick, you're saying heal yourself. That's a threat. That is a threat. And so I bring this to you because it is an indication of the utter panic that is settling in among the regressives in our country, because they are deathly afraid that they're losing their most consistent source of victory, which was the courts. I mean, think about it. Prior to Obergefell, 31 to 32 states amended their state constitutions or passed legislation to define marriage for themselves as the institution, the lifelong institution of one man and one woman. But regressives, not content to allow the will of the people as expressed in their various states to carry today, they say, no problem, we'll go to our tried and true source, the court system. And Anthony Kennedy, who told us once he retired, when he ruled in Obergefell, he wasn't thinking about the Constitution. He wasn't thinking about the law. He was ruling based on his feelings. He just couldn't imagine a world where same-sex marriage was not upheld. It just didn't feel right. Color me crazy, but I thought we had this Constitution. So they're afraid, folks. And again, when I say regressives, hear me well. Regressivism is a bipartisan institution. You have regressives in both parties. I've explained before that regressivism, I define regressivism based on Calvin Coolidge's speech. Those who seek to reverse the course of the founding fathers, to change course from the settled fact that all men are created equal, to change course from the settled fact that the best government is small government. These immutable principles that are articulated for us in natural law, like a man is a man and a woman is a woman. When you reject those notions, you're not moving anything forward. You're not progressing. You're regressing. That's why I call it regressivism. That's why you have Republican regressives who don't have a problem with big government. They just want to be their form of big government. They don't have a problem with government spending. They just want to spend it on their own priorities. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. So when I say regressives, I don't want anybody to hear as if it is a particular party. Now, I will tell you that a lot of Democrats are far more passionate and committed regressives. They are far more revolutionary in their demonstration, their demonstrable commitment to regressivism. But you have plenty of regressives in the Republican Party. Plenty. Which is why I think you don't hear very many Republicans speaking out about the sanctity of marriage. You have a lot of Republican regressives that are hiding behind Obergefell as an excuse to be silent on marriage. But just like our nation wasn't silent following Dred Scott, just like our nation wasn't silent following Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court can be wrong and has been wrong on many issues. And just like the court's decision in Dred Scott concluding that a man who looked like me did not have the legal right to file a lawsuit in federal court, we as a nation did not accept that premise, overturned it by the 13th Amendment. Similarly, we as a nation, many of us who recognize the sanctity of human life, that children in the womb are just that, children, we're not going to let a 1973 court opinion, Roe versus Wade, shut us up on the issue. No. Similarly, you're not going to shut me up on marriage. I don't care what the court said in Obergefell. Marriage is defined by God. I'm just telling you straight up. Marriage is defined by God. But regressivism, boy, these people are shaking in their boots because they're realizing they're losing their grip. They're losing their grip on the court system. Where do I want to go now? I have a few minutes left. I'll do this. I'm gonna share a story with you now. The headline is that a jury, and this is an Arizona jury, orders Planned Parenthood to pay $3 million to a former director of a Planned Parenthood clinic who exposed lies and negligence. Now, I'm not sharing this story to support this former clinic director. The former director of this clinic in Arizona is an illegal alien herself. I mean, you want to talk about what kind of a nation? If we're a nation that's hostile to immigrants, why do we allow illegal immigrants to file lawsuits in our courts? Man, listen. The United States of America is one of, if not the most hospitable nation in the world for legal immigrants. We take in over 1 million legal immigrants every year. There is not another country in the world that takes in 1 million legal immigrants every year. Not another one in the world. On top of the numbers of illegal immigrants we have this influx of illegal immigrants. I don't know if I said that right. On top of the number of legal immigrants we take in every year, there's a consistent influx of illegal immigrants. Anybody who wants to have a discussion on immigration, you must acknowledge, if you want to have a productive discussion on immigration, you have to acknowledge that the United States of America takes in more legal immigrants annually than any other country in the world. That's just a fact. You might not like that fact, but it nevertheless is a fact. All right? In this case, not only was an illegal immigrant granted allowed to file a lawsuit in court in Arizona, a jury awarded her money that her lawyers didn't even ask for. In this case, an Arizona jury unanimously awarded Mayra Rodriguez $3 million in damages because she was fired after she reported the Planned Parenthood clinics, where she was the director, and several other Planned Parenthood clinics' illegal conduct, their high complication rates, their falsification of affidavits and patient records, their incomplete abortions, and their failure to report statutory rape. All of this was happening. Young girls would come there pregnant, hadn't been taken advantage of by men. And the Planned Parenthood was so thirsty for the money, they wouldn't even call the police. And so Mayra Rodriguez reported this, and Planned Parenthood fired her. So you want to tell me again how they're committed to women's health if they'll fire a woman because she reported the abuse of another young lady?
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.